I'm gonna put you through that wall. Frank Murphy's notorious threat resonated throughout F is for Family, but ironically, it was many of the show's characters who ended up going through the metaphorical wall, disappearing from the Murphy family's dysfunctional 1970s neighborhood without explanation. From neighbors who vanished after making strong impressions to workplace colleagues who stopped showing up at Mohican Airways, these forgotten figures reveal a deeper story about how Bill Burr's animated series evolved during its 5-season run. This is what happened to every lost F is for Family character, the ones who disappeared from the Murphy orbit between 2015 and 2021. For a show centered on a relatively small suburban neighborhood and workplace, F is for Family introduced an impressively diverse cast of characters, but not all of them maintained consistent appearances throughout the series. Some disappeared after serving specific narrative purposes, some were quietly phased out, and others simply fell victim to the show's increasingly focused storytelling approach that prioritized the Murphy family's core dynamics over peripheral players. Let's start with the characters who vanished from the Murphy suburban community, a setting that initially promised to explore the broader social dynamics of 1970s Middle America. Perhaps the most significant neighborhood disappearance is Lex, the recently divorced neighbor introduced in Season 1, Episode 3, The Trough, as a swinging bachelor enjoying his newfound freedom, after initially appearing as a potential corrupting influence on Frank, encouraging his worst instincts during a brief separation from Sue. Lex seemed positioned to become a recurring foil, representing an alternative lifestyle to Frank's family commitment. Despite making a strong first impression and creating natural tension within the Murphy marriage, Lex virtually disappeared after Season 1. He made a brief background appearance in Season 2, Episode 1, Heavy Sledding, but then vanished entirely despite the show continuing to explore the neighborhood's dynamics and introducing new neighbors, rather than developing this perfectly established character. Another notable neighborhood vanishing act involved the Jenkins family, the Murphys' black neighbors introduced in Season 1, Episode 3, The Trough. Their introduction seemed to set up exploration of racial dynamics in 1970s suburbia, a theme perfectly aligned with the show's unfiltered examination of the era's social issues. However, after a handful of brief appearances, the Jenkins family largely disappeared from the series, making only occasional background cameos in neighborhood scenes. This abandoned thread represents one of the show's most significant missed opportunities, as the relationship between the Murphys and the Jenkins could have provided rich material for exploring both racial tensions and unexpected connections across cultural divides. When I was researching these neighborhood disappearances, I uncovered Animated Americana, a fascinating book examining how animated series depict different eras of American history. There's an entire chapter dedicated to F is for Family that reveals creator Bill Burr and co-creator Michael Price initially planned a much more ensemble-based approach for the series, with significant storylines for multiple neighborhood families. Original writer's room documents show plans for an episode focused entirely on the Jenkins family's perspective of living next to the Murphys, which would have provided a powerful counterpoint to the show's primary viewpoint. Production constraints and the decision to focus more deeply on the Murphy family dynamics ultimately shelved these plans. For animation and social history enthusiasts, this glimpse at alternative development paths shows how many potentially rich character explorations exist only in pre-production before being lost to necessary narrative compromises. Beyond the neighborhood, many of Frank's colleagues at Mohican Airways appeared prominently before mysteriously vanishing from the company roster. The most striking example is Pogo, the Korean War veteran and airline employee introduced in Season 1, Episode 1, The Bleedin' in Sweden, as part of Frank's workplace circle. His distinctive personality, defined by his war trauma and unusual perspectives, made him a memorable character who seemed positioned for ongoing appearances. However, after Season 1, Pogo's presence at Mohican Airways diminished dramatically. By Season 3, Episode 1, Are You Ready for the Summer? He had essentially disappeared with no explanation for his absence, despite the continued focus on the airline workplace. This disappearance is particularly noticeable because the show continued to introduce new Mohican employees, rather than developing already established characters like Pogo. Similarly, Derek Robertson, the young ambitious new manager who tormented Frank in Season 2, Episode 5, Night Shift, seems set up as an ongoing antagonist representing the changing workplace culture threatening Frank's position. His conflict with Frank created perfect generational tension that mirrored broader themes about the changing economic landscape of the 1970s. Despite this promising setup, Derek largely vanished after Season 2. When workplace antagonists were needed in later seasons, the show introduced entirely new characters, rather than building on the established dynamic with Derek. This pattern of abandoning potential recurring characters in favor of creating similar but new ones became increasingly common as the series progressed. F is for Family also introduced several memorable characters who made strong, single-episode appearances only to never be seen or mentioned again, despite their apparent significance to main characters' lives. One of the most striking examples is Brandy Dunbarton, the mentally unstable wife of Frank's boss introduced in Season 1, Episode 6, Oh Holy Moly Night. Her explosive personality and connections to both Roger Dunbarton and Bob Pogo created multiple avenues for continued appearances, particularly as the series continued to feature her husband prominently. Despite these narrative possibilities, Brandy never returned in subsequent seasons. Even episodes focusing on Roger Dunbarton's personal life or featuring social events where she would logically be present showed no sign of her. This disappearance represents a curious abandonment of a character who provided both comedic opportunities and potential plot complications. Another notable one-episode wonder was Kenny, Sue's charismatic boss at Plast-Aware. Introduced in Season 1, Episode 5, The Liars Club. As a manipulative but magnetic sales leader, Kenny made a strong impression as both a mentor to Sue and a potential threat to her marriage with his predatory behavior toward female employees. Despite setting up what seemed like an ongoing workplace subplot for Sue, Kenny disappeared after his introduction episode. When Sue's Plast-Aware career continued to feature in later episodes, entirely new managers and colleagues were introduced rather than building on the established dynamic with Kenny. This missed opportunity to develop Sue's professional world represents one of several instances where the show sacrificed continuity for standalone storytelling. Perhaps the most curious disappearances in F is for Family involve extended family members who appeared briefly only to vanish, despite their blood connections to the main characters. The most notable example is Frank's brother Rocco, introduced in Season 2, Episode 7, Breaking Bill, during a phone conversation. This brief mention established Frank had a brother, creating expectations that this family relationship would eventually be explored in person, especially given the show's focus on family dynamics. However, Rocco was never seen on screen and rarely mentioned again, despite multiple family gatherings and events where his presence would have been natural. This abandoned family connection represents a significant missed opportunity to explore Frank's background and family history beyond his complicated relationship with his father. Similarly, Sue's sister Gloria, while mentioned occasionally, never appeared on screen despite numerous family events where her presence would have been expected. The few references to her established an interesting dynamic of sibling rivalry between the sisters, which could have provided rich material for exploring Sue's background and family insecurities. These missing family connections created curious gaps in the Murphy family tree, especially unusual for a show so centered on family dynamics. While production constraints likely limited how many recurring characters could be maintained, these absent relatives represent significant unexplored dimensions of the main characters' lives. F is for family established several of Bill, Kevin, and Maureen's school friends and peers who appeared prominently before mysteriously disappearing from their social circles. The most notable example is Claire, Bill's first girlfriend introduced in Season 2, Episode 3, The Liars Club. Their relationship represented an important coming-of-age moment for Bill, with Claire's more mature perspective pushing him toward growth. The significant emotional investment in establishing this relationship seemed to position Claire as an ongoing character in Bill's life. However, after their breakup, Claire virtually disappeared from the series. She made a brief background appearance in Season 3, Episode 2, Paul Lynn to Block, but then vanished entirely, despite the continued focus on Bill's school life and social development. When Bill developed new romantic interests in later seasons, the show made no reference to this formative relationship, creating a sense of disconnection in his character development. Similarly, Ben, Kevin's bandmate who appeared regularly in early seasons as part of his rock star aspirations, such as in Season 1, Episode 4, F is for Halloween, gradually disappeared from the series. Despite the continued focus on Kevin's musical ambitions, Ben and other established band members were eventually replaced by new characters, disrupting the continuity of Kevin's social circle. This pattern of introducing and abandoning peer relationships for the Murphy children created an unusual sense of isolation in their development, with each season essentially resetting their social worlds rather than building on established connections. The pattern of character disappearances in F is for Family reveals something fundamental about how the show evolved over its 5-season run. What began with elements of an ensemble comedy gradually narrowed its focus to concentrate almost exclusively on the core Murphy family dynamics, particularly Frank's personal journey. This narrative contraction reflects both creative choices and likely production realities. As the series progressed, it increasingly prioritized emotional depth over breadth, exploring the psychological complexities of its main characters rather than maintaining a large, supporting cast. This approach allowed for the powerful character development that defined later seasons, particularly Frank's confrontation of his childhood trauma and gradual growth as a father. The show's setting in a specific historical period also influenced these character decisions. By focusing on how the economic and social upheavals of the 1970s affected a single family rather than an entire community, F is for Family was able to use the Murphys as a microcosm for broader historical themes without diluting its impact across too many perspectives. Despite these narrative advantages, the disappearance of so many promising characters represents significant missed opportunities. Characters like the Jenkins family could have provided valuable alternative perspectives on the era's social changes, while consistent workplace colleagues would have created stronger continuity in Frank's professional struggles. In many ways, these lost F is for Family characters reflect the show's commitment to capturing the transient nature of 1970s American life. Just as economic instability and social upheaval cause real families to experience disrupted connections, during this period, the Murphy family exists in a world where relationships outside the immediate family unit often prove temporary and unreliable. Some characters deserved more development, others served their purpose perfectly in limited appearances, but all of them contributed to the rich, unfiltered portrayal of 1970s suburban life that made F is for Family more than just a nostalgic comedy, an unflinching examination of an era's impact on ordinary people caught in extraordinary historical changes. The next time you rewatch F is for Family, pay attention to the characters who briefly enter the Murphy orbit before disappearing without explanation. Their abbreviated presence isn't just a quirk of the show's production, but a reflection of its core themes. That in a decade defined by instability, even interpersonal connections proved as vulnerable to disruption as the economic foundations of middle-class American life. Which Lost F is for Family character do you think deserved more screen time? And do you think the show's approach to introducing and abandoning characters enhanced or limited its storytelling? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember what Frank Murphy would say: if you see something you don't like, put it through the fucking wall.